And my big worry at the time was that, okay, well, the only thing I know about this guy is that he was a reality TV star and he's made a lot of money. He's a celebrity. He's a New York Democrat. My big worry was this guy's he's actually a leftist. You know, he's kind of a secret leftist that's infiltrated the Republican Party, and he wants to get in there and move us all to the left on all these issues. Turns out I was totally wrong.
What do you make of the Democrats' final pitch to voters that Donald Trump is a fascist and that his supporters, according to President Biden, are garbage?
I think that's going to be a real tough final pitch for the voters, and especially, look, the calling Donald Trump a fascist and Hitler and a Nazi. We've heard it before. This is the same thing they've been saying about him for the past, since he was on the political scene, so for 9 years now. About one of the big problems with that argument is that it's just absurd on its face, but also they want us to ignore the fact that Donald Trump was actually president for 4 years. So we've already seen what a Donald Trump presidency would look like. And if he's some sort of fascist dictator, warlord type figure, then we would have seen that reflected in the way that he governed. But that's just not the case. I mean, you could make an argument that he was the most restrained president in terms of how he exercised his power in the last many decades, if not the last 100 years. He signed fewer executive orders even than his the three presidents before him. So, and he didn't start any new wars. He didn't invade any countries. So that's the issue, is that they're making this claim about Trump and hoping that voters just forget what actually happened during the 4 years that Trump was in office.
Do you think the Democrats despise their own voters? Previously, Hillary infamously said that half of Trump voters are a basket of deplorables.
Yeah, well, they certainly do. They're not making any attempt to hide it. The only thing that was kind of shocking about Joe Biden calling his supporters garbage is just that he said it out loud. But we already know that they feel that way. And it's not that much of a departure from, and it's not that much more extreme than what these people say, openly all the time by calling what they consider to be quote unquote MAGA extremist Nazis. I mean, there was all this, Donald Trump is having a rally at Madison Square Garden, and you've got, it's not just leftists on Twitter or YouTube and YouTube comments saying that it's a Nazi gathering. It's like Hillary Clinton saying it, as you point out, Tim Walz saying it. I mean, all the major corporate media saying this is a Nazi rally. And when you say that, you're obviously not just referring to the guy standing on stage. You're talking about all the people who are at the rally, the tens of thousands of people, most of whom are just average, everyday, Americans. These are not rich and powerful elite people. So that's what they think about Donald Trump supporters. They think that they're Nazis. They think that they're, morally reprobate, deplorable, as Hillary Clinton said. They've been very clear about that. It's another difference between them and Donald Trump, because we hear so much about Donald Trump's rhetoric and his style, his tone that supposedly turns off voters. But you'll notice that when Donald Trump uses harsh language about someone, it's almost always directed at his political opponents, like other politicians that he's running against or that who oppose him, the media, people like that. He's targeting the elites with those kinds of comments. If he says something harsh, if he uses an insult about somebody, and certainly he's been known to use insults, it's almost always going to be someone in the media, a celebrity, a politician. He never insults the voters. I can't think of a single example where he's insulted Biden or Harris's voters. He doesn't do that. That's something that you only find on the other side.
Your film, Am I Racist, was described by The New Yorker as a kind of Borat-style parody. Were you trying to take inspiration from Borat?
I think, Borat was a hilarious movie. I'm a fan of at least the first film when it came out, so 20 years ago now or so, 15 years ago. I wouldn't say that we kind of looked at that movie and modeled ours after it in that kind of deliberate way, but certainly it is a kind of a comedic inspiration. And the kind of thing that the approach we're taking in the movie, of course, has been done. Other movies have taken a similar approach, and that's one of them, probably the most famous example. So in that sense, you could say it's sort of inspired by that. Although, of course, it's not only a very different topic that we're exploring, but one of the key differences in our film, I think, is that whereas with Borat, he was kind of embarrassing average people, in the middle of, middle America, people living, just average people. We're going after people with PhDs, elites, the people that are really running the DEI scam, the kinds of people that charge thousands of dollars for seminars and make millions of dollars on books. That's who we're. If anyone gets embarrassed in our film, it's those people.
Are you making another film?
I would certainly like to. I mean, we've made 2 films now. The first one was What Is a Woman, and I've found that my day job is doing a podcast, and I think that political commentary has a place, and it can have hopefully have an impact. I certainly hope that it does, because it's what I do every day. But with a film, when you make a film, and it reaches an audience like that, it has an impact at a level that I think commentary can't. So I want to continue doing it, and we're sort of working through some ideas right now on what the third attempt might be.
I want to ask about race relations in America. How do you assess race relations today in 2024?
I think that unfortunately, they're worse now than they were probably even when I was growing up back in the 1990s. And we mentioned this at the beginning of the movie, that if you think back to, if you're in the millennial generation, the time when you grew up, 90s, early 2000s, it was not any kind of racial utopia. Obviously, that's never going to exist on planet Earth. But, it seemed like, and there were, you had race riots, you had the OJ verdict, you had different kind of racial controversies, obviously famously, that cropped up. But for the most part, things were basically okay. And I can remember going to school in the 90s, and there wasn't this, going to public school, and there wasn't this intense, constant focus on race and racism like there is now. So I do think that quote unquote race relations have declined, and I don't think it's an accident. I think it's we might say a sort of a managed decline. It's intentional. And these DEI programs that we target in the film have a lot to do with that, because they're deliberately trying to convince people, trying to create this kind of racial resentment and suspicion. And they're telling you that if you're black, you are a victim. Whether you feel like you're a victim or not, you are. And if you're white, you're a victimizer. You're an oppressor. Whether you think you are or not, whether you think you're racist or not, you still are racist. And it's kind of drilling that into people's heads. And that obviously has a negative effect on race relations.
There's been a huge focus on race in this 2024 election campaign, particularly with the White Dudes for Harris campaign, but also Kamala's desperate courting of black male voters who she is worried are voting for Donald Trump. So why do you think so many black men are not voting for the Democrats this time round?
I think, and she still will win a majority of black men, just like black women. So I don't think anyone's claiming that Donald Trump is going to win more than 50% of the black male vote. But she's not. She probably will not get as big a share of the black male vote that Biden got, or even Hillary got in 2016. So, and the reason for that, I think, probably has more to do with sex than it does with race. That she's running a campaign that there's no message in her campaign for men at all. She's not trying to talk to men. Almost 90% of her messaging is very explicitly, deliberately towards women, liberal women in particular, because it's all centered around things like abortion. And on the rare occasion that her campaign has any message that's supposedly to men, when you listen to what they're saying, it's actually still to women. So even the times when they're talking to men, they're actually talking to women, because their message to men is always, well, you need to vote for Kamala Harris because it's the right thing to do for the women in your life. There is no message for men specifically. Kamala Harris hasn't gone to men and made a case where she said, look, I know what you're dealing with, what you're struggling with. Here's what I'm going to do to help you specifically, to make your life better. She hasn't made that case to men. And so, of course, she's gonna start losing that vote, as well she should.
Do you think that Lyndon Johnson and his liberal reforms in the 1960s were good for race relations, in particular his Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is criticised by many conservatives, people like Christopher Caldwell, as creating a dual constitution, as enabling things like affirmative action? Was the Civil Rights Act the right way to go about improving race relations? Should it be repealed and replaced? Should it be amended?
Yeah, I do think there's an interesting argument to be made about the kind of the dual constitution, as you say. I think that in spite of all that, because I just said in the 1990s that it seemed like race relations were kind of as good as you can expect them to be, because we are human beings, we're flawed creatures. Tribalistic by nature, all of those things. So you're always going to have things like racism, hatred, all that stuff is going to exist in society. But still, there was a time when I think things were about as good as you can expect them to be in the post-civil rights era. So when I look at the decline of race relations, I don't necessarily go back to the 1960s. I go, where I go is to 2008. I mean, if we have to pick a time, a specific time, I think 2008 is more the landmark moment for that, because that's when Barack Obama was elected. And the reason why race relations declined after that moment is because, and I'm not a Barack Obama supporter. I didn't vote for him, but you would think that maybe one good thing you could take from the fact that Obama was elected is that, okay, well, apparently we're not a systemically racist country anymore. I mean, if a black man can be at the top of the system, can run the system, was elected to run the system twice, then that's pretty good evidence that we're not a systemically racist country. And it is evidence of that. But the problem is that on the left, they didn't want to lose the systemic racism narrative. They couldn't lose that because it's so it's so profitable, and it's something that they can use to manipulate people. It's a very potent tool. And so as soon as Barack Obama was elected, and in particular into his second term, they had to ramp up the efforts to convince us that we're racist, to convince us that we're a racist country. They had to go looking for it. And that's when you started hearing about things like microaggressions, for example. And that comes up in our film, Am I Racist? But prior to 2008, nobody was talking about microaggressions, because now you had to go look. Well, okay, you might think you're not seeing racism in this exchange, in this environment, but here are all these little tiny, seemingly tiny things that are actually racist. That's when the BLM movement cropped up, and then as you get into towards 2020, and then certainly into 2020, obviously. The BLM riots, the race riots, George Floyd. And I think if you were to trace it back to one thing in particular, I think you could trace it back to Obama.
But in the 90s, you also had the Rodney King riots, you had the O.J. Simpson trial. Race relations were actually pretty bad in some instances. So this does go back a long way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, right, of course. That's why I said in the 1990s it was not, it's not perfect by any means, but I guess this is part of my point is when we talk about race relations, you kind of have to have an idea of like, well, what are we shooting for here? What's the best we can hope for? And one of the problems is that on the left they have this utopian vision where they tell us like that the ultimate goal should be there's no racism in society. Have what they would call an anti-racist society, but that's not ever going to happen, because we're talking about something that exists inside the human soul, because we're a fallen species. So you just have to have an idea of like what's the best that we can hope for, And I think we sort of got there, and then we've been declining for the last 2 decades since then.
I want to ask about the White Dudes for Harris campaign. You may have seen this infamous advert of very effeminate men supporting Kamala Harris, pretending to be kind of cowboy figures. What do you make of this White Dudes for Harris campaign as a white man yourself?
This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that the Democrats and the Kamala Harris campaign, even in the moments when they're supposedly talking to men, they're actually talking to women. And that's a perfect example of it. And that ad in particular, which wasn't produced by the Kamala Harris campaign, but was produced by her supporters, and I think it reflects her agenda and her ideology. That's not that is, if that's anything, if you look at that ad, if it reflects anything, it reflects a liberal woman's idea of masculinity. And that's why the ad was made, and it ends up being just cartoonish and ridiculous, and it becomes a punchline.
It is interesting though, isn't it, seeing this White Dudes for Harris campaign? It seems to be quite a novel development. I haven't seen any white men for other politicians or various candidates in the past. Is it legitimate for white men to organise along racial and gender lines to try and protect their group interests, particularly when we see every other group campaigning for their own interests, whether it's women, LGBT people, ethnic minorities, and so on?
Yeah, of course it's legitimate. It's perfectly legitimate. The way they're doing it there is cartoonish and ridiculous, and it's organized by people who actually hate white men. So that's the problem. But of course, it's if every other group can do that, if every other group can organize and say we are this group, this is what we're interested in, then why can't white men do that? I mean, it's ridiculous to suggest otherwise. It's ridiculous to suggest that every group in existence is allowed to organize around that identity, except white men. They're the only ones who can't. That's completely ridiculous. It's an indefensible proposition, I think. And it is interesting, and I've talked about this, that although the White Men for Harris, although it is ludicrous, and the way that they go about it ends up being demeaning and degrading to the very people that they're supposedly trying to appeal to, it is, I agree, interesting that they are, at least in name, making a pitch to white men specifically, and that's something that not only have you never heard from any other politician, at least in modern times, but the Republicans, you would think if you didn't know any better, and you heard that there was a White Men for campaign out there, and you didn't know who it was for, you might think, okay, well that must be a Republican thing. But it's interesting that the Democrats are the ones who finally do that. Even Republicans won't. Even Republican candidates, they'll go out and they'll say, hey, here's what I'm going to do for Black Americans. Here's what I'm going to do for women. Here's what I'll do for Hispanics and Asians. But they will never explicitly say, oh, and white men, here's what I'll do for you. They won't say that, and I think that's there's no defensible reason for that.
Why do you think Republicans are so scared to talk about white men, to talk about this issue? Is it because they're worried about being called racist? That issue that you tackle in your film?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea is that if you, we're at a point now, I think, where if you acknowledge the existence of white people in any positive way, in any explicitly positive way, it's automatically racist. So in any time you're acknowledging the existence of white people, you're allowed to do that, but it has to be in the context of shaming them, scolding them, lecturing them, talking about the evils that they've committed and their ancestors have committed allegedly, and all that kind of stuff. You're not allowed to acknowledge their existence in any sort of positive way. And just as we know that white people, every group in existence, every ethnic and racial group is allowed to say that they're proud to be who they are. If you're Black, you're proud to be Black. If you're Asian, you're proud to be Asian. No one has an issue with that. But if a white person says, I'm proud to be white, it's considered racist. So that's why the Republicans won't do it. They think that they'll be accused of racism if they do. They're right. They will be accused of racism. But that's not a good reason to kowtow to that. And by the way, they'll be accused of racism no matter what they do anyway. So there's no reason to submit.
Your film was genuinely hilarious. I think that some conservative media trying to make Hollywood-style films can be quite cringe, but in this case, very, very funny. What did the film teach you about the human psyche? You got people to do just utterly bizarre things throughout the film, particularly these liberal kind of white people. What did it teach you about the herd mentality? When one person does something, suddenly it seems acceptable to other people.
Yeah, it did reveal quite a lot about human psychology to me, and none of it was very encouraging. I found it to be, it was somewhat distressing. Some of these scenes that we shot in the film, and some of the things that we were able to do that we shouldn't have been able to do. I mean, so an example, spoiler alert, but at the end of the film, as the film kind of builds and builds as I'm going down the rabbit hole of my racial awakening journey. And we wanted it to sort of get more absurd as it goes along, and it does. And by the end of it, now that I'm a DEI consultant myself, I hold my own DEI workshop, and the workshop itself is supposed to be kind of a microcosm of the film in that it starts off pretty ridiculous, but it gets weirder and weirder and darker as the workshop goes, as I'm sort of taking these people through the steps to become anti-racist. And as we get towards the end of the workshop that I was teaching, there's a couple of things we do at the end there that in our mind going into it, when we were shooting it, we said, okay, well, this is going to be too far. Like, this is wrong and it's too far, and this is where the class, the people that are there, and they're all real people, they're not paid actors, this is where they're going to get up and walk out. And we figured that'd be sort of the end of the scene. And what we found, and you'll see if you watch the movie, I don't want to give too much of it away, but even as we got towards the end and we're doing the things like nobody should go along with this, they did. And I think it tells you, well, for one thing, it kind of goes back to what I said, that race is a very potent tool to use, and racial guilt in particular, for a lot of people these days. It's not so much for me, and if you haven't been indoctrinated into this, maybe it doesn't have the same impact. But for the people that have, racial guilt is a powerful manipulation tool. And there are a lot of people these days, white people, who are terrified of being called racist, and they will do almost anything to avoid being given that label. And that's one thing it tells you. And then even beyond that, it's just, there's the kind of group psychology where people, they tend to look around to see what everyone else is doing, and everyone else is going along with it. No one else is getting up and walking out, so they figure, okay, well, I don't want to be the first. And then if you're standing there and you're the position of authority, even if there's no reason for you to have any authority, you haven't earned it, it's like, who's this guy? I'm sitting there with a DEI certification that I got for like $40, taking a 10-minute course on some random website. That's all I have. I'm just some guy. But I'm standing, they're sitting, I'm projecting myself as the authority, the expert, and that's enough for some people to just go along with it. And and that can obviously be exploited, and it has been, and it's made a lot of people a lot of money, which is ultimately the message of the film.
I want to ask about your own journey on Donald Trump. In May 2016, you sent out a series of tweets, and before that were incredibly critical of President Trump. You said that he was a tyrant, you said he was a liar, you said that he befriended and funded a man that he believed to be a rapist and a murderer. And you also said, when I said never Trump, I meant never Trump. That has not changed and never will. So what's changed?
Yeah, well, that certainly has changed. I mean, look, if you go back to 2015 in the primaries, it was a time when conservatives were at each other's throats. I was certainly part of that. I've kind of learned since then. I try not to, the kind of infighting on the right and among conservatives. I've try not to engage in it nearly as much as maybe I did back then, because ultimately it doesn't help anyone but your political enemies. But at the time, it's like Donald Trump came on the scene, and it's like no one had ever seen anything like this before. And my big worry at the time was that, okay, well, the only thing I know about this guy is that he was a reality TV star, and he's made a lot of money. He's a celebrity. He's a New York Democrat. My big worry was this guy's he's actually a leftist. He's kind of a secret leftist that's infiltrated the Republican Party, and he wants to get in there and move us all to the left on all these issues. He's claiming that he's going to, appoint conservative Supreme Court justices, will overturn Roe, but that's not going to happen. That's what I thought anyway at the time, and so I was very angry, when he came on the scene, thinking that this guy. The only thing I know about him is that he's a New York Democrat, and this is, he's no matter what he says, he's actually on the left. Well, then he wins, and he's in office, and that's not how he governs. Turns out I was totally wrong. He actually is not only a conservative, but he's farther to the right on some key issues than many conservatives were before him. Immigration being, of course, the big one. On something like the pro-life issue, he's certainly not as, I'm a lot farther to the right on the pro-life issue than Donald Trump is, but he did in fact appoint 3 conservative justices. Roe v. Wade was overturned. So turns out I was just wrong about that. And after seeing that, it's pretty easy to decide that you're going to support him. And even before that, after he won the primaries, now he's running against Hillary Clinton, and even if I'm worried that I don't know if this guy's for real or not, I don't know if he's actually a conservative, but he's certainly better than Hillary Clinton, who's evil incarnate. So for me, it was really after the primaries were over back in 2016 that the whole Never Trump thing was irrelevant. He won, he won, and now he's against Hillary Clinton. We certainly don't want Hillary Clinton to win. And then he beats her, and he's president now, so he's the president. And now we can hope that he governs in a conservative way, which in fact he did.
What do you make of Kamala Harris as a candidate, as a person? What do you make of her character?
I think that we talk about her like she's kind of an empty suit, a frivolous person, and she is both of those things. But I think we might be making a mistake in painting her as if she's merely that, because she is also kind of a dyed-in-the-wool far left radical. She's a true believer. Just take the abortion issue for example. We know she's flip-flopped on pretty much every issue. She's walked back her position on almost every issue. She's running to the right of where she was, at least in 2020, on almost every issue, immigration, crime being the 2 big ones, except abortion. That's the one where she hasn't. And she goes around claiming that I've always been consistent, I've always fought for quote unquote a woman's right to choose. And on that, she's actually telling the truth. When she was Attorney General of California and the Center for Medical Progress with Dave DeLeiden, they had those undercover videos at Planned Parenthood revealing that Planned Parenthood was literally selling baby parts, like the aborted the body parts of aborted babies. They were selling illegally on the black market. They have video of this, extensive video documentation. And Kamala Harris, as the AG, what does she do? No, she doesn't go after Planned Parenthood. She doesn't even investigate to find out more about it. Instead, she goes after the journalists and tries to throw them in jail for revealing this in the first place. So that tells you, if I were to look at one episode, one thing in her past that tells you who she is, I would point to that. And it tells you that she's not only a far left radical, but just in my opinion, an evil person. We can't allow her to assume the reins of power.
One last question. You are a man that has a million opinions. on everything. This is GB News you're talking to. I want to ask, what is your opinion on Great Britain? Good, bad? What do you think politically?
A good place or a bad place? That's that would feel like an oversimplification. But I also confess that I almost exclusively follow politics in my own country. But I don't necessarily look at your country as a model of what I want to follow. I'll put it that way.
I think that's fair enough. Thank you so much, Matt Walsh, for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.